Hey everyone, and welcome to OfferZen's webinar. It's the 360-degree tech hiring insights, where we navigate today's tech hiring landscape with dev recruiters and managers. So I'm Nicola. I'm a senior account manager at OfferZen, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. So before we dive into the event, there's some rules of engagement. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can post them in the questions tab that's on the right-hand side. In case you missed anything throughout the webinar, it is recorded and we will be able to share that with you. And finally, you can use the chat tab to add any comments throughout the session. Okay, that worked well. Welcome again to everyone that's just joined. I'm Nicola and I will be hosting today's webinar. So a few words about OfferZen. If you don't know anything about us, OfferZen is a developer talent marketplace that was founded in Cape Town, South Africa, 2016. So we're proudly South African. Our marketplace has helped over 2,000 companies in Africa and Europe hire curated job-seeking software developers. Companies on OfferZen can directly reach out to skilled developers, and you'll get upfront information about the preferred tech stack, their salary, and previous roles, and they make their hires in 25 days on average. So if you're hiring, or if you'd like to browse the developers on our marketplace, simply hit the I'd like to know more in the poll on your screen, and we'll send you a link to check out OfferZen yourself. So we also have a strong focus on community, running events like this or creating content on our blog. So we definitely have more great community events planned. And if you're keen to join any of these upcoming events, just select that on the poll. In just a few moments, I'm going to be joined by Tamsanka Moyo, Nick Spiritos, and Lee Watts to discuss the 360-degree tech hiring insights, where we're going to navigate the discussion around the tech hiring landscape by devs, recruiters, and managers. So without further ado, and enough of me talking, let's bring our speakers onto the stage. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today, gents. I think just as a start, you could perhaps start with introducing yourself, your name, tell us, where you're working, a little bit about yourself, and perhaps the lens that you're approaching this conversation with. Lee, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. Name's Lee Watts. I'm the CHRO at a company called Kotosa Systems. We span 4 territories: the UK, the US, Luxembourg, and Cape Town. We are at the intersection between asset management and technology, and we hire largely database decision-making professionals from software engineering background who have some form of technical business analysis experience. I'm looking forward to this webinar. I really want to dive into quantifying performance and the residual impact of salary on the back of that. So what work you've done, which makes money, saves money, and ultimately improves efficiency, which we can quantify to a currency value.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's a pleasure to have you. And then we have Nick Spiritos. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Nick. I've been a developer for nearing a decade soon, in all sorts of roles, also all sorts of domains. I mostly specialize on the back-end side of things. I operate a lot in the community space, especially on the PHP side with communities like Laravel Cape Town and events like this. I will be representing the person being hired, the developer job seeker side of this conversation. I have recently hung up my consultant hat and joined a job, but I'm not saying where exactly, just until I pass my probation and I'm absolutely sure I'm in there fully.
Thank you so much. And then we have Tamsanka, which I fondly call as Tams. So Tams, you can tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Nicola. And yeah, thanks everybody. It's great to be on this webinar. My name is Tamsanka. I'm the CTO at GEM. And what we're doing at GEM is digitizing HR and HR benefits via WhatsApp. I'll be representing the hiring person on this call, so maybe Nick and I will do some sparring. I'm looking forward to it. But really, like representing the hiring manager, and I think I can represent that accurately because I'm a techie, also a people person, also a business. All of those three when we're making decisions in terms of who the best people to hire are.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we do have 4 themes that we're covering today. So we're going to start with the first one. So I'm the referee. So guys, sparring gloves on. Let's enter this discussion. Just remember to the audience, if you have any questions, you can also comment and pop that in. So the first theme is the availability of talent and opportunities. Okay, so we've got a sneak peek from our State of the Dev Nation data. And quite interestingly, I saw this and I was like, wow, JavaScript, C# and Java are the top 3 languages. I think for me, it was more like JavaScript really knocked everyone out. And those were the top 3 languages with the most candidates in the market. And then we followed through with the frameworks, and you can see React really topping off there, but closely followed by Angular and Node.js in the top 3. So looking at that data, I think we also looked at location, and we saw that between Cape Town and Johannesburg, it's pretty much like split equally, and the rest, of course, it was like Durban, Pretoria, and other places. But Cape Town and Joburg still take the majority of the market with 37 and 32%. So considering all of that and the availability and where we're sitting in terms of the popular frameworks and languages, Nick, I'm going to pose a question to you. You've recently, like you mentioned, you've been on the job market, you found a job, which is obviously congratulations. Can you tell us what your experience has been like while you were looking for a job? Like what was the visibility and the availability and obviously the quality of the opportunities?
Yeah. I guess to start with a bit of a timeline, for me, the job search was about 2 months while I
Okay.
was still freelancing and speaking with a fair few companies. And yeah, the experience was, I want to say, a bit of a mixed bag. I wouldn't say it's all bad. It wasn't all great either compared to years before. Um, I did see, I think there was a lot more noise. There was a lot more sifting I had to do to find the opportunities that I most gelled with. And in the end, the effect of the personal network came through and shined through really, especially for me. So yeah, that's the thing in a nutshell.
Okay. I know you mentioned that 2 months, and obviously there were some challenges. Like what challenges did you actually experience when trying to match the roles with your skills? Like what was the experience like?
Yeah, I think the experience lined up a fair bit with what you showed with the data on available candidates, except the
Mm-hmm.
opposite for me, because I'm not a JavaScript developer. I think the opportunities also reflected that.
Okay.
It was a little bit harder than normal to find a PHP or specifically Laravel position for myself.
Mm,
I did find one in the end, but yeah, in the beginning they were not so plentiful.
okay.
And then the other big factor is nowadays, after a few years of remote and now hybrid and a bit of a return to office, there's even more of a split across the tech, but also the way of working in that regard. I'm more of a remote person, and there seem to be a fair bit fewer fully remote roles out there now.
Okay, that's actually coming up in one of our themes. So I'm going to touch on that. I know you feel strongly about that, and I know we also have some other contenders on that, but we'll get into that discussion and dig deeper. Thank you so much, Nick. Lee and Tams, now you're coming from the opposite side where you're pretty much like hiring managers. So what are the biggest obstacles you encounter in finding the right talent? Is it quality versus quantity of candidates? I know Tams and I, just for the audience know, Tams and I, we have a client-customer account manager relationship, so we've had these discussions before. So I'll start with Lee first, and then Tams, maybe you can follow. So just tell me about the obstacles you encounter, Lee.
I think it runs in two places, really. So several years ago, there were more opportunities than there were engineers for them. And because we didn't largely know how to source, select, vet a good quality engineer that could change the face of your organization by an order of magnitude, we were just like, hiring, like just going out there, guns blazing, hiring a ton of people. And I think the residual impact of that has been some sort of PTSD for us. And we're very selective and particular in who we put through our processes, which comes with both its pros and cons as well. Because how then do you assess somebody who, has potential or has a particular skill set just off the faces of a CV? How do you run the risk of putting them through hours and hours of, mundane sort of CodaPad and Codility type assessments? And what does that now look like today? So we're getting tons and tons of applications of individuals that aren't necessarily the best fit for this particular environment. We don't run the most popular code stack, and we also don't run the least popular, but we are creating really cool commercially SaaS innovative products. And if you've got an au fait for financial services and investment management, that tends to sit quite well with us, because it's difficult to build something for someone when you don't actually know what they're going to be using it for, or the nuance behind that. So from our perspective, it's been a hard slog. We found, not unlike Nick, the personal networks to be the biggest source of wins, huge ROIs there. And in partnering with companies like OfferZen and several others, we find that having that level of intimate knowledge, not only of the engineers, but their capabilities, as well as the community and their network, allowing us to reach into areas that we don't have access to, has been a great
Okay.
But yes, that's where we are. We're pivoting away from hours and hours of quantified assessments, hours and hours of screening CVs, and diving almost back into the one-on-one conversations with a whiteboard.
And that's pretty much like your approach to sourcing and how you've evaluated talent, and that's pretty much helped you to maintain the quality, right, of the people that you're actually getting in.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then, it's bloody difficult getting them in. And then once they're in, you've got to keep them, right? But that's probably for another theme at a later date. But yes, that's some of the frustrations we felt. We feel like the hiring process, certainly when it comes to tech talent, is doing a full 360. We're going back to in-person whiteboard type setups.
Okay, all right. And Times, from your perspective, what were the biggest like obstacles you encountered?
Yeah, I have to agree with Lee and Nick. I think there's, the personal network, the personal touch became really valuable to us, because we were hiring senior engineers for most of the year, and we found it really hard to determine who's senior and who's not, just by looking at a CV, and even strangely enough, just by looking at the salary. Because I think in my past experiences, you could look at a CV, number of years, look at the salary and go, okay, this is potentially a senior. And what we started finding is that we weren't getting the level of seniority that we're looking for just on those two clues alone. So the best way was to meet people, talk to people, try and assess them in person if possible. And I guess the challenge there is it just takes a lot of time, because we are doing a lot of talking and a lot of meeting of people where perhaps it's not going to be the right skill level that you're looking for. But we found that. And then I think also similar to what Nick is saying, we are hiring Python developers and TypeScript developers. So if you look at those metrics, maybe it's controversial, but I think a lot of those people who are saying Python are people who are in data science, is what I found. But if you're looking for like a pure Python developers, there weren't a lot of those people around. And also when you're looking at JavaScript and people who are actually quite good at TypeScript, for example, they were just formed a subset of that. So also just trying to find the skills that we're looking for was difficult. But at the end of the day, I guess how we got around that was finding really good senior talent who are also adaptable. So if you were a Java developer, C# developer, and willing to build a career in Python, we were more than happy to bring you on board. Similarly, if you were really good with those languages and had some JavaScript experience, not too much TypeScript experience, we're also happy to bring you on board. So we had to do a bit of compromise, looking more at your aptitude to learn, your ability to be adaptable, instead of just going and ticking, do you have TypeScript or Python? Otherwise, I think we'd still be hiring today.
Okay, sure. All right. So considering like everyone's unique role in the hiring process, What's the one thing you think companies or candidates they should understand about the current tech talent pool that they often get wrong? Like, this is now a different perspective. So, each one of you are entering this from a very different, unique perspective. You're seeing it from a different point of view. So, what's the one thing that you want people to really understand? Lee or okay, Nick, you can go first.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's directly about the candidates, but more so in the process with candidates. Feedback timeliness is key. Like I've had other friends and former colleagues that have also been on the job hunt for longer than I was, with much more experience in certain ways, and it's almost a hurry up and wait with the more promising roles. It's like cool, let's do an interview, let's have that personal touch, and then oh yeah, we just need a budget approval. Ghost. There's a lot of ghosting going on basically, and it's very frustrating, especially when you think you have a good connection with a certain company.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the ghosting is like, and I think Lee, I don't know if you or Tams, if you guys want to get in, because you're coming in from that hiring perspective, right? And I think it really sucks when you're like ready to look for a job, and then you get excited and you make the connection, and then the candidate's like yes, and then suddenly they don't hear, and this probably never happened when you're reaching out. But we often see it. And just by the way, Nick, we also see it on the flip side where the companies get really excited and they feel like, like we had a great conversation, but no, I don't know what happened. Like this person's just like not talking to me. Like what's going on? So
100% goes both ways.
it goes both ways. But that's quite insightful. Thank you.
If I could just
Lee?
follow on from, oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, sure. No, Tom's go for it.
I was going to say, like Nick, I think it's something we've also seen, and my boss, who's the CEO at Gem, is very strict on getting back to people. I get into trouble when I ghost people, and we've got very specific timelines. By this time, you must have contacted the candidates, gotten back to them, given them a yes or no, because it is quite easy when you are on my side of the table talking to lots of people to let some of these processes go through the gaps, and before you know it, it's 2-3 days you haven't made contact. But on the other side, it's one person who's really got high expectations, great talent, they've got options, and if you keep quiet on them, then to your point, like you have a really bad experience. So from my hiring manager perspective, I think it's been a case of trying to address that through discipline, but also the team culture trying to build where highly relational, keep relationships going. Even if you're turning down somebody, don't turn them down, in a bad way.
Yes.
Reach out to them, to talk to them afterwards, even after you've turned them down, and keep the connection going is what we try to aspire to. Yeah.
Absolutely.
From an HR and talent management perspective, we sit sort of between the cerebellum of the candidate and the hiring manager. And so we don't actively work a role unless the budget has been approved. That's the very first thing. The budgets can change, depending on the candidates and skill sets that come through the doors. And that's an area of adaptability and fluidity that you just need to be comfortable with. When it comes to the ghosting, absolutely hate that. It is the worst people PR you could have for your organization. It's better to get a no than never to hear from the organization again. It leaves a bad taste in one's mouth. And to that note, we've actually created an internal SLA within our talent acquisition team where we've said to them, okay, guys, within the phases of the interview process, under no uncertain terms can an individual be within one phase for any longer than 7 business days. It's very important.
That's wonderful.
And then we try and educate our hiring managers through our hiring manager one-on-ones, where we say to them, okay, guys, we will discern your urgency based on your involvement with us and the candidate. So if we don't hear anything from 2 weeks, clearly not that urgent, and we'll communicate accordingly. But I agree with you, Nick. Also from a company perspective, when you're trying to grease the cogs to get the machine moving, and it's this self-fulfilling negative perpetual cycle of I don't have the people, so I can't perform the function, but I can't get the people because I haven't taken the time to. It just becomes a bit of unwanted pressure, resulting in a bit of chaos and tyranny. But yes, I agree. No ghosting allowed.
No blue ticking, no ghosting. Communication is key, people, both ways. That's how you make the relationship work. All right, enough of relationship advice. Let's move on to the next theme. That went well, theme 1. Thank you so much. So we're going to go into how to find the right match, which is skills, experience, and sourcing. Okay, so what we also found is from the dev's perspective, more are prioritizing remote and also growth options and the language of frameworks that they will be using when evaluating a role. And on our marketplace, we're also seeing a strong skew towards more senior developers ready to make their next career shift. So, in finding the right match, actually, devs are assessing a company's culture mainly through speaking to current or past employees via the company website or the interview experience, which this is actually kind of following through from what we actually just said. It's quite interesting. So here's a question to our speakers. What's the most important factor in finding like the right match when it comes to skills, experience, or is it cultural fit? Like when you're actually looking for someone, what do you really look for? I know for some companies, they don't really care if the person has like that personality. They're like, as long as they can do the work, I'm happy. And for some people, they're like, if this person's a great culture fit, we will teach them and we will really bring them up because culture is so important and it really makes our company. So what really works for you? And this obviously from Nick, from your side, from a company, like when you're selecting a company, what works for you? And then from our hiring manager's perspective, let me know.
I'll have a go first.
Okay.
I think fundamentally you have to be able to perform the function in which you're employed to perform at some level, okay, an acceptable level for
Yes.
entry. We also want curious and humble employees. So people that are prepared to look around the next corner, over the next hill. But, you know, if they fall or if they get called up on something, to be humble with that. I think experience is a loaded word. It's a bit of a swear word in that what is experience? I think it's a state of mind within the individual's attitude, actually. And so what will happen is if you've been successful and you can, you know, cool your jets to that, but also if you failed and then managed to pick yourself back, you know, so fall 7, stand 8. I think that's fundamentally at the core of what we would be looking for. Everything else on the back of that, we can work with, because if you hire that successfully, it augments your culture in a way that it'll never be again. And if you're doing it from the right, meaningful place, it's a net positive.
Okay, perfect. At times, like what's the most, from your side, the most important factor?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to Lee. I think for me, if I can just zoom out a little bit, I don't think I've ever hired someone where I've been 100% confident that this is going to work out. So, you know, what I do is I look for signals and clues to figure out, is there a good chance that this thing can work out? And typically that's where I look at experience, your technical skill, culture fit, if you want to call it that, and look at all of those as clues to kind of give me a sense of how confident am I that this person can succeed in this role that we're putting them into, and that they can deliver, you know, what the job requires. So I'll give you an extreme example. You might get somebody who's got like great skills, is super excited about joining GEM and revolutionizing HR, but they've had 7 jobs in like the past 2 years. You know, my confidence starts to go a little bit low, because I'm going, the experience is kind of telling me here that if other people couldn't keep them there for a long time, what chance do I have? So probably this is not going to work out. So it depends on, I guess, the role that we're looking at. But I think for me, the guiding principle is always, once I've collected all the information and I have to sit in front of my 2 co-founders and the HR person and say, this is our person, what am I saying? Can I put myself on the line and say, this is the right person who will succeed in this role? Or do I feel like there's something here that's making me doubt whether this decision is going to work out? So I look at all of them holistically rather than trading them off and saying, I'll compromise on one or the other. It just depends on what's giving me that sense of comfort and confidence that this is the right person for this role.
Okay. All right. And Nick, when you're looking for a new job, obviously culture, well, I'm assuming culture would probably be on the top of your list, or would it be more like the company and, you know, like how long they've been on the market or the type of things that they're covering? What do you really look for?
Yeah, so I think, especially from my side as the developer, it's very much trying to find the right phrasing. It's more about what stage of in your life and career you're at, what you're feeling for. Sometimes we want to push more for, I want to have a more glorious role with like don't care about culture. I like the prestige. Or I've burnt out a bit. Let me find somewhere with a better culture. So I think that's very much up to the individual, and I think we actually don't discuss that enough about how our actual lives intersect with our career search in that way. But for me personally,
Mm,
right now, it has been much more of a cultural thing. I
okay.
had a time where I did prioritize, okay, I don't want to be at boring companies or like super corporate or whatever. And in the last while, I've been like, you know what? It's fine. For me, it's much more about who I'm interacting with and working with, and do I gel well with them.
Okay. Nick, I do have a follow-on question. It's pretty much, I think you've been asked this plenty of times during an interview. Like, what specific skills and experience do you think make you a strong candidate in the current job market?
Yeah, that's always a fun one. Yeah, in the current market, if we have to summarize the market in a nutshell as there's a lot of noise to sift through, which makes it all difficult, I think then what helps to stand out is just variety. Whether that's variety of experience, like as a developer, you can't just be coding, especially as you're going from that mid to senior level. You need to have a project you're leading a little bit under your belt. You need to maybe do a little bit like architecture type work, try and get that sort of variety of experience. And then in the age of social media and content and vast volumes of content, it helps to be a little bit out there, post a little bit on socials, have a spicy hot take on your blog type of thing that you can put on your CV and
Okay.
be like, here's what I believe, to differentiate you as a person from, okay, here's the other list of 500 developers in the queue for this role. And yeah, for me personally, again, the community work has been a large part of that. Just being active
Mm,
and visible within that community for my network, and also just hosting meetups and things like that to bring other developers
okay.
in as well.
So I think that comes up quite often. Like people really want to see like, where does your interest really lie? Like how involved are you in the tech community? Because it shows that it's not just a job; it's actually something that you're passionate about. So
Yeah,
yeah, and your hot
there's a
takes are, I
difficulty
think,
to that though. I would say because again, if you're in the phase of your life where you have a family and kids, or you just career is not your absolute most important thing, then it's hard to say, oh, you need to be more of a developer.
yeah.
Um, so there's a balance to strike there, but again, that's up to the individual.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, definitely. I'm a mom, and oh my God, if I have to do anything outside of work, I would just die. So I feel you. So it's not like it's not really like obviously if you do have capacity and you can do it, but I think if you're obviously just sharing your thoughts and if you can actually write a blog that also just shows your interest in what you do. All right, thank you. Lee, when you're sourcing candidates, what strategies do you use to go beyond the resume and evaluate whether a candidate truly has the skills and experience required for the role?
It's a difficult one because it's a bit more nuanced than that, and we are definitely in this weird transition phase from a set way, textbook
Mm,
correct school of thought to more of a innovation is required. We need to lift that existing limitation so we can create these new rules. And I think from our perspective, there's a couple of things we've tried to do and are still iterating our way through those MVPs, which is to quantify largely qualitative data that's received within your interview process. So we would we would set up like a hiring committee, predefined folks, and they would each be tasked with formulating their own set of questions, but not a million questions. That's like 3
okay.
questions each. Right? Because other questions are interlaced as a result of the answer, naturally. And the whole idea here is for us to be able to assess a score based on the depth of answer that we're being provided, and then to ask the entire batch of candidates that we're meeting the same set of questions so that you've got that control metric.
Mm,
And it doesn't become about the color of your shirt or the color of your hair. It really does boil down to, who scored the best, and then we can take it from there. We are still guilty, I guess, and not guilty. I mean, we're still utilizing tools that help us assess coding capability,
okay.
um, ingenuity of thought, and to some degree, not always, depending on the seniority and which team it's going to align with, we would put the candidate through some sort of sentiment type analysis, but very light touch. It's like, that's the important bit. We don't want the candidate to think that we don't want them to think we don't know what we're looking for, because that could be a terrible outcome. And so we're trying these things, but hey man, I'm here on this webinar to learn more ourselves. We're certainly not the experts in our space regarding this just yet, but we definitely have some skin in the game.
Okay, perfect. Quite interesting take. And Tom's, what criteria do you prioritize? Like, when you're trying to find like the best fit for your team, like, how do you balance the technical the skills and the experience, and the culture fit? I know we've had like a chat on the assessments as well. Tom's has an assessment, and the one day we had the call, and he was like, what do you think of this assessment? Do you think my assessment's, do you think it's difficult? Like, what's going on? Because that was one of Tom's way. But maybe let's hear from you, Tom's. What do you like? What criteria do you actually prioritize here?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to be super clear on who we need, and why. And that's why at Gem we've got 2 co-founders, and my job is to really go and get into their heads and find out and say to them, this is what I think we need. Are you aligned? And they might change their minds. But I find like having that conversation up front gives us a sense as a business in terms of what level are we hiring for, and what exactly will they be doing when they join us, because then that determines the skill set, the years of experience, and also the type of, if I want to call personality of person we need. You know, is this going to be somebody who we're looking for to be a people manager or to be an individual contributor? Because that also drives kind of like those cultural fit questions that we're going to be asking. I think sometimes it's a bit unfair that I've got somebody I'm trying to hire for being a people manager, but then I'm going to give them this crazy tech assessment when actually what I'm looking for, somebody who's maybe going to look after people. So it's really important to get that clarity up front, and then that will determine how we then balance those 3 aspects of tech skill, culture fit, experience. If I could just say something, also in terms of like what I've found is developers are sometimes, the people I've been talking to have been very bad at selling themselves as well. And I think that's where it gets quite difficult, especially when you're having those initial conversations. And I found the people who can actually like sell themselves really well up front. By that, I mean somebody who I once interviewed somebody who said, you know, when I joined this business, we were doing 1,000 transactions a day. When I left, we were doing over 1 million a day. You start to look at that and you go, oh, wow, okay, there's impact. This is what this person is doing. And then that starts to really help me also then balance and go, okay, this person's experience, they've done the following things, which I can go and talk to their previous colleagues. And then if they have a bad day, let's say during the technical assessment, I can always weigh it up against what they've done in the past and the type of growth that they've stimulated, because maybe I can say, okay, they had a bad day, and then that can come into consideration. So really, it depends on a number of factors, like how well has the person put themselves in front of me? What are they selling themselves as? And, you know, then the process goes a lot easier.
Okay, thank you. There's 2 questions that I see that are from the audience that I just want to run through. So Rosemary actually asked, like, this is like a question for Tom's or Lee, like, what do you consider more valuable in a candidate, their formal qualifications or their hands-on experience?
Tams?
I think experience is really great. I wish I could say just both. I tend to go for experience more than formal qualification, but I'm also very
Okay.
aware that there are some jobs where formal qualification or some sort of qualification matters a lot. So I would say if you're self-taught, you've got amazing experience, you still need to demonstrate that you understand some of the principles, like, let's say, data structures or different types of architecture, that you've come across those things and that you've self-taught yourself those things, and then it's great. And similarly, if you've got all the book knowledge but you haven't actually put it into the real world, it's also not as useful. So really trying to get a good balance and a good mix is always great. But if you don't have one or the other, then you must be able to demonstrate that, you know, if you don't have a formal qualification, have I self-learned and taught to the point of somebody who does have that qualification? And if you don't have that many years of experience, can you show me that you've at least put your book knowledge into practice? Yeah.
I think it's a good answer. I think there is a relevancy scale when it comes to experience over formal qualifications dependent on the phase of your career. It's very difficult to unlock an opportunity as a brand spanking new engineer without having some form of evidenced completion of a task you set your mind to. There are some, of course, more granular cases in which this person left and then they developed Apple. They never finished, and they developed Windows, Microsoft, whatever. But I think broadly speaking, I think it would be important that at the early phase in your career, you have some form of qualification. It becomes less relevant the further on in your career you go, because you've got quantified examples of successful performance. And so, great question. Difficult to answer.
Okay. One more question before we move on to the next theme. And this is from Nicola asking, what about people that are changing their careers, like career changes? Who's making a complete transition from architecture to tech? Like, how do companies see those candidates when you're trying to build a portfolio but don't have industry experience?
I'll take this one for the company. I think we're quite narrow and we're short-sighted from an organizational perspective. Very often we're only looking maybe a year, 2 years into the future. From a hiring capacity perspective, based on, let's say, average tenure or market trends, right? So you want that individual to be showing you a return on the investment you're making in them, whether it's salaries or ancillary products in some way, shape, and form, or ancillary benefits, sorry. And so we're narrow, we're short. We don't really take too well to that in the short to medium term, sadly. But again, another stunning question and food for thought.
Okay. Perfect. Right. Let's get into the controversial part of the show. Work policy impact and response with Nick smiling all the way. Okay. So most companies on OfferZen are offering hybrid policies followed by remote. And we're noticing, probably due to that, fewer devs are working in fully remote roles. However, developers still seem to prefer fully remote opportunities over hybrid or in office. And just FYI, so do I. I love remote working. Okay, so Nick, this is something that I know you really wanted to get into. So how do different workplace policies, like such as remote or flexible hours, influence your job choices? And if you can think of an example as well, like obviously when you were on the job market, like how did that really steer your way? Let me know.
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, I much more prefer remote as well. I've thrived in a remote environment, especially with more distributed companies across multiple countries. And yeah, like I said, we've seen much more of a return to office, or at least the hybrid type setup happening a lot, especially in South Africa. I think my decision making on it ebbs and flows depending on how, to maybe not use a fun word, desperate I may become in the job search. If there's no opportunities for my preferred method, then at some point people take what they can get. And I think that's especially happening a lot, especially for those who prefer remote and then have to take a hybrid role. Something that I not prioritize, but like to gauge as well is the degree of flexibility. Because for context, I don't live in Cape Town anymore. I live near Cape Town, but I live on the coast.
Okay.
So commuting in every week more than once is it's a lot. You're basically doubling my fuel mileage for the whole year, and then I got to pay a lot of my repair bills, that sort of thing. Never mind the time, never mind all the extra factors. So one thing I spoke with a lot of companies about was they were all like, 2 days in office. I'm like, look, I'm happy to do 1 day. I'll drive out all the way to the other side of Cape Town from where I'm at once a week. And a few of them were okay with it. Some weren't. And I was like, well, I think it's not going to work then. But yeah, I think that's a good gist for that.
Okay.
For job hunt, yeah.
Yeah, I think I think with COVID and everything that's happened, people had to very quickly change their mindset and to just stop what they're doing and just reset into this whole mindset and everything changed. Like the way you coordinate your life, your kids, everything, you have to get used to this. And then suddenly it's like, oh, everyone shift right back. And then everyone's like, oh, I like being at home now. I like wearing my joggers.
Yeah.
I
I think
I
that's a
like it all.
symptom. Yeah,
Yeah, it
there's a
is.
symptom there of not fully adapting to the plus sides of remote. I think, especially in the local market, remote was a patch on top of the current situation, and we never learned to work fully within remote ways,
Mm,
learning to communicate well over text
that's
and
true.
video and like documenting
Yes.
things. And so now coming back to it is the patch in the opposite way of like, okay, I don't
Yes.
know how to make this work. We're just going to go to the old way instead of trying to make it
Yes.
work.
Very, very insightful because it very quickly was dropped on us, and there weren't like policies and procedures, and a lot of companies failed in some ways, like to get that put correctly. Like, like people just weren't like rocking up to meetings, people weren't set up properly. But let's hear from Lee. Like what challenges do you face in aligning company workplace policies with candidate expectations? Like, how do you handle these conversations with candidates?
Yes, it's a topic which can be spoken of for days on end. So consider the reason of the forced behavioral change. It was a public safety health issue. So in order to get to the older ways of working and have everybody back in office every single day, you have to mandate that and force that. Otherwise, it will not change. I think where the argument got skew was where we had advocates for remote and then advocates for in office, and we actually lost the reasons as to why we connect in person, and that's to drive purpose, right? So we have a policy doc, of course, which stipulates very clear parameters for remote working. You have a sound environment, one which is stable, and you can't have any internet or load shedding issues. That becomes a bit of a problem for us. That being said, though, we do appreciate when engineering teams want to get together in office for a couple of days for sprint planning, and we'll throw them a parade and we'll put on some snacks and we'll make sure that they connect together to drive that purpose, to walk further together. It is a difficult one, though, because you heard this here, but some of our best engineers, some of the most productive, intuitive, and forward-thinking, groundbreaking engineers in the world in which we work aren't in Cape Town. They're not in Joburg. They don't reach any of these lists. In fact, there's a cluster in a part of South Africa, which I'm not going to reference here because any other employer will be, spamming that area to find out who they are. But they're phenomenal. They're phenomenal. And whilst we will fly them into the Cape Town office, twice a year, it's not mandated. It's very ambiguous. We don't use it as a tool for performance management, but it is unfortunately a factor if you aren't performing. See, the seniors work remote, but the juniors want to learn from the seniors. And how do they do that without peer review and in person? So it's a bit of a conundrum. It's a mix of two worlds.
Yeah, it is. I think it definitely is. And Tom's like, how has like the workplace policies affected, like, or impacted your approach to building and managing your team? Like, how does it affect your hiring decisions? I mean, I'm assuming there's quite a few. I mean, looking at even at the stats as well, and listening to Nick's views, like, how does this affect you?
Yeah, I think to answer the question directly, like I think by having a hybrid policy, I've looked at probably excluding already 50% of the talent pool already by just having that decision. But I do think it's the right decision for us because we've decided that we want an in-person culture where people actually enjoy coming to meet each other and coming into the office and working in person. And we then have to acknowledge that it's not for everybody, that some people will go, I don't want that. And I don't even want to have a conversation. And that's perfectly fine. And even those that do want to have a conversation, we're not here to try and convince you that this is the right way of doing things. You just have to be the kind of person who wants to come into the office from time to time and have fun with the people and work with people in the same space. And I think to Nick's point earlier, people are at different stages of life. Sometimes you're in a different location. Sometimes you've got different responsibilities and this won't work for you. But I think if you look at what we're trying to build and the culture we're trying to build, I think it is the right call. But that's not to say, I think in the broader sense that, one is better than the other. I do think there is a big case to be made that in the world we live in, we haven't given remote working enough of a chance. It's almost like we've spent decades doing in person and then 2 years of remote, and then we go, no, that's not going to work. So I do agree that we need to have the right decisions. I mean, the right reasons for having an in-person policy. I don't agree that it has to be because remote wasn't working, we're going to do in person. Rather, I prefer the way we're going about it going, this is the culture we want to build. And therefore, that's why we're back in the office in person. And I can just say from my team, we do 2 days in the office, but some people come in more than 2 days in the office because they love being here. They love lunches. They love talking to people. And I think that just speaks then to the culture that we're trying to build. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's get into the last theme, which is salary expectations and negotiations. Right, Lee smiling, ready to hit this one. So, better salaries are still the number one reason developers are leaving a role. However, as we head into 2025, salary growth has slowed down compared to previous years. So, Nick, what are your you don't have to exactly tell me, but what are your salary expectations when applying for new roles? Like, how do you approach the salary negotiations?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I would call it negotiations so much. If I see a budget early on in the conversations before we even have a first interview and it's not right, I'm like, it's probably not going to work. I don't want to waste anyone's time. And likewise, I don't want to be in long conversations where in the end they tell me, oh yeah, we can only afford like a half of what you want. That's not fun. I think part of a lot of human nature is to strive to improve things wherever we go. So yeah, I mean, a little bit more at every next step is fine. Again, relating to where people are in life, personally, right now, I'm not prioritizing salary as much. It is very much how does it weigh compared to when I was freelancing and how I earned in that way and the roles before that. And I think I've hit a good level of improvement there. But yeah, right now it's very much about being open and honest. I understand not every company wants to post salaries up front because sometimes that makes them get a lot of candidates that just will never be worth looking through for, just because they see a big number and they're like spam, 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 apply everywhere. But I think it's definitely worth having those conversations very early on.
Okay, all right. And then Lee, what current salary trends have you noticed in the tech industry, and what common pitfalls do candidates fall into during negotiations?
So I've got a couple of sentiments and I need to get them off my
Yes,
chest. Right?
get them off your
The first
chest.
one is I strongly believe that salary is a financial hygiene element. If you can't afford to pay the bills to which you currently have, you can't take that job. Whether the company wants to pay more or not, that's kind of the base on which we're working. The second thing is I don't believe market salary or market related actually exists. I believe it's a fallacy. We've all got that friend that works for a large multinational trillion-dollar company, and we hate to admit that they are a better engineer than us and they're earning 300% on what we are, but we claim that is market related. Okay, so let's remove that two sides of the scale out. When we go down the middle, I think the world is in a crunch. I think we're in a place now where we don't actually know what the definition of good looks like and what we need to pay for that. And so it becomes a phase of life thing. And it's one of these in which the organizations don't want to publish the salaries up front, not because they're hiding anything, but it's because there are individuals within the existing workforce that maybe aren't at the same caliber or level yet that will feel their nose pushed out of joint. And so it's a trying not to cut your nose off to spite your face scenario. That being said, in the words of A16Z, software is eating the world. And so we need to increase our budgets appropriately. And as such, I think there's still real world opportunity in paying over and above what market-related trends you might be seeing for somebody who can take your business exponentially forward. We do use a couple of companies to help us. So we use the Economic Research Institute and we use a company called PAVE, which is out of the True Venture stable. And they have a technology solution which provides us real-time reporting update based on salary survey information they're receiving from 10,000 participants, and it feeds straight into our HRMS. So we have a benchmark of where we're at and we can have those conversations, but it's more evocative than hybrid is salary. It really does draw an emotion.
Okay, And Tams, how do you determine salary ranges for new hires? Like, how do salary expectations influence your hiring decisions?
Yeah. I think Lee's got so many wise words there. I'm not gonna sleep tonight thinking about this market related, whether it's I'm coming from a startup, so I think out the gate we cannot compete with large established businesses. It's not something we can do, and it's not wise for us to do that. So I think that's my starting position. And then also that means that when I'm looking at these things, I am talking again to the two co-founders of the business, talking to them about what can we afford, how many people can we afford, and what can we do with the people that we think we can afford. And that then starts to drive the conversation early on, where in our application forms, people have to put in what their current salary is and what the expectation is. In OfferZen, it's very transparent as well, saying this is what the salary is. And then in my first meeting with the candidates and meet and greet, again, we discuss it up front to say, this is what we can afford, or what are you looking for? Would you be happy with this? And genuinely, some people go, no, I'm not interested. This is not going to work for me. Some people go, yes, this is great. This is more than what I expected. And I'm going, okay, cool. Whereas others go, no, I'm happy to even come in flat. I do think where it gets tricky is when salary becomes the only factor. So I'll tell you, I've had a few cases where, you're speaking to a candidate meet and greet and you say, why do you want to join us? And they go, because I want more money. And I'm going, okay, I understand, like that is a good reason, but also, there's other people competing with you who are coming and saying, I want to impact the lives of people who are in factories, or I want to make a difference. And I think this is a place where I can make a difference because of what you guys are building. And that story for me is more compelling than somebody who's coming and saying that I'm here because I want more money. So it's really also like, I guess, looking at salary being a very important factor. I mean, I'm a salaried individual. I'm not a co-founder. I'm a, but at the same time, it's also coming and saying, I think to Nick's point is you are looking for, is this a good opportunity for you to grow and to be a place where you can see your career moving forward in the long term?
Okay, so like to everyone, like what's the one key factor in salary negotiations that you think companies and candidates often overlook but can make a big difference in the outcome?
I have to answer. I have to take the microphone. I think if you're in an interview and Nick says to me, I built this product or provided this service or implemented this application, which made money, saved money, improved efficiency to the order of this value at this currency, it would be so difficult for me not to go, how much do you want to earn? And I think that's the piece. It's not an entitlement thing. It's a deliverables thing. And yes, I'm speaking about it from an HR perspective, but fundamentally we own that piece of compensation. And so it's quite business critical, and not just in the new search, but also within your performance appraisal and your new annual salary increase windows. Quantify your performance. You're best positioned to do this. You're technically and analytically creative as a software engineer. What a brilliant eclectic mix of skills where you can quantify exactly why we should be paying you over the odds.
Okay. We do have one question. Amber asks, what are your thoughts around benefits when you're not able to offer competitive salaries? Anyone can go.
I can go for it.
Okay.
I still think salary is one of the most predictable, safest ways of getting rewarded. And I think the people I speak to fully understand that, and they'll always push it. So I try and steer away from going, join us for this, but I can offer you these following benefits, because I do think the people at least I've been speaking to are very clear going, I want something that I don't want promises for things in the future or things that I cannot quantify, rather pay me what I want. And that's the basis on which I have that conversation. But I fully appreciate, maybe because again, I'm in a startup and maybe maybe the benefits aren't like at a bank, for example, where you can get a nice bond. I appreciate that maybe that's a different space, but my approach has always been, let's talk about salaries, let's talk about things that are quite tangible, and then the benefits will speak for themselves over and top of that.
Okay.
I agree with that approach, and I think one very underrated. I have not seen genuinely any company do this, but I think it can be super simple. Aside from a lot of benefit stuff is also culture stuff. So it's like, okay, beers on a Friday. Some people don't drink. Some people don't want that. If you're talking about those kinds of benefits. But I think what a lot of companies don't do and they should consider doing is actually just time flexibility. Whether that's, if you can't pay me X, can you give me more days of leave? Can I do
Okay, yeah.
a 4-day week? Those types
Mm,
of things. I think there needs to be a lot more flexibility with candidates of like Lee says, if I can prove and justify I'm worth X and you can afford
mm.
Y, can you give me the difference in some form of time back in my own life? Maybe that's worth it to me. I can spend more time with my family and loved ones or doing whatever I want or that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that needs to be explored more.
All right, thank you. So before we end, overall, what advice would you give to attendees on navigating the current tech hiring market? Lee, would you like to go?
Yeah, I think get started. Just get involved. It's an iterative process. Your first version won't be perfect. You'll look back and go, what was I thinking? But that learning growth curve is exponential. And I think utilizing modern technologies to the best of your advantage and leveraging peer groups and those that have had exposure and experience to that will stead you in
Mm,
good steadfast for the future.
yeah, that's actually good advice. Nick?
Yeah. I think similarly to Lee, the peer group, the network effect, be as active as you can within communities, go to meetups whenever you have time, put your name out there. It's very much if you can't find the right roles for you, maybe somebody else finds the wrong role for them, but it would be the right role for you. And now you're in their mind and they'll forward it along to you. That's part of a lot of that push and pull. So definitely that. And then the other piece of advice I would say is do whatever you can to survive. It's a long stretch. It's a long
Whatever
game
you
right
can to
now.
survive. Okay.
Yeah, do whatever you need to for your mental health or your finances or whatever to be able to just
Absolutely.
grind it out.
Okay. And Tom's, your advice?
Just the same as these other two guys, like prioritize a relationship, even if it doesn't work out today. Like respect the person on the other side.
No
Keep
ghosting.
contact. Yeah, and like the best stories I've had are people where I've actually declined them and said, sorry, I don't think this is the right thing. And 2 weeks later,
Yes.
this person came to me and said, hey, I've got this other offer. Can you give me advice? And I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. But it just demonstrates that we had built a relationship through the interview process where they felt like, okay, this is someone I can come and ask for advice for. And I was willing to give it. And I think if we can prioritize relationships, we can continue to build those networks and friendships in the industry
Mm.
that benefits everybody.
Wonderful. Amazing. Thank you so much. So that's the end of our webinar. We've covered a lot of ground and hopefully our audience feels enabled to navigate these kind of discussions. The video recording will be available soon in case you missed any nuggets of wisdom, and there was quite a lot here. So special thanks to our speakers, to Nick, Lee, and Tamsankwa, and thanks to everyone for joining us today and for your questions. All right. Bye.
Thank you.